Jesus is sort of the jester in the court that's always making fun of or antagonizing the problem in the system. The thing I love about this is that the problem in the system is that people, like the two people in our story today, had been excluded from community. Because of their illness or because of their situation in life, they would have been excluded from participation in the community. And Jesus, through the grace of God, restores them back into connection and community. I love this, and every time it comes up, we're probably going to talk about it because it is one of the most fascinating parts of the Gospels, the story. But what I want to focus on most today is this one little phrase: your sins are forgiven. It's an amazing thing to say. I mean, it takes quite a bit of authority to think that you are capable of saying a sentence like that. You've got to really know what you're talking about to utter something like that. To say your sins are forgiven? What do you speak on behalf of God? Only God can forgive sins. But you and I live in an interesting time, which is that this story was written on the other side of Calvary, on the other side of the events of Easter. And you and I live on this far side of Calvary, the events of Easter. And you and I live in a time where somehow our religious atmosphere has gotten a little, I don't want to go as far as to say toxic, but it's in danger of it, where we think that the forgiveness of sins is based on the blood Jesus shed on the cross alone. So I actually feel like I'm required at some level to always point out to people, Jesus forgave sins before the cross. Right? He didn't need to die so that you and I could be forgiven. Jesus forgave sins before that. Well, what does that mean? What are the implications for that? That's not trivia, by the way. I know some of you are big fans of trivia. That's not trivia. There's something deep going on. The forgiveness of sins doesn't come because of the blood Jesus shed. The forgiveness of sins comes out of the love of God. Jesus could forgive sins in this story well before the events of Easter, not based on blood, based on love. It is the love of God that both forgives sins and makes us well, restores us back into community, connects us to each other. We live in a really dangerous time. Charlie, if you could put up this famous passage out of Hebrews chapter 9, I hear this verse quoted to me. You cannot believe how often this verse gets quoted to me. That without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness of sins. Are you familiar with this concept? No? Some of you? Okay. You didn't want to raise your hands, and that's fine. But I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't the only one that this happens to. But if you read this passage in context, which we're going to do together, you're going to notice something really interesting. The author says, and in the same way he sprinkled with the blood both the tent and all the vessels used in worship. He's speaking of the Old Testament priests. Indeed, under the law, almost everything is purified with blood. And without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness of sins. What's the key phrase there?
Under the law.
Under the law. It's weird to me then that new covenant people, Christ followers, would perpetually quote this passage about the cross that brought us into the new covenant. It's a very strange thing that's happened. And I actually have done some research, and I'm going to put up another quote. There's this guy named Dallas Willard who speaks of the danger of what he calls vampire Christianity, that seeks, once the blood, little else. You and I live in a time where vampire Christianity is the most visible and vocal expression of American Christianity. You cannot believe how much difficulty I have in finding new songs for us to sing that aren't based in penal substitutionary atonement blood theology. I go on praise charts, I go on different worship websites, and I find a chorus that I really like. I get really excited, like, I would love to sing this song with my people. And then verse 1 is starts out like, God is love. Verse 2 is like, we're really terrible and God doesn't like us very much. But verse 3 is, then Jesus died. And because of the blood, every song is like this. It is amazing how in the cultures that are writing new worship songs, there is an obsession with blood. So I was listening to an interesting interview this week, and I just lost the author's name, but her new book just came out, and it's called My Problem with Everything. I'm definitely going to read it. It sounds fascinating. But she pointed out something really interesting, that in the 1970s, gender was sort of more loosey-goosey than it is now. That everybody was a person, and women could be lawyers, and boys could be nurses, and there was this whole thing, right? Sesame Street promoted it, that anybody could be anything. And then she pointed out that it was actually when our technology allowed us to know the gender of the child before birth that we became obsessed with gender. And it has actually spiraled so much that now we have these elaborate gender reveal parties before the child is even here, where we have cakes, right? And it's white frosting, and then you guys know what gender reveal parties are? Okay, and you cut into it, and then if it's blue, inside it's a boy, and if it's pink, it's a girl, right? They do it with balloons. Did you see the guy that started the forest fire with the gender reveal? Wow. Anyway, this thing has gotten out of hand, but she said it really started when our technology allowed us to know the gender before birth, right? And when I heard her say that, I immediately thought of the same thing with Christianity. It was when we moved off the farms where we didn't harvest our own animals. We didn't butcher our cows and pigs and chickens, where all of those things became protein at Chipotle, right? Everything's just a protein now. It was when we started buying our meat under saran wrap and we got distanced from the farm and we got distanced from the blood. Something went wonky in our theology, and in our evangelical songs and our preaching became obsessed with blood. It's weird because we live in a culture where we see less blood than ever before. When it's time for someone to pass on into their next life, we put them away in a place that's specially designed for that. So usually that doesn't happen at home, although some people are bucking that trend, right? We don't harvest our own animals. We are so distant from blood. But it's weird that it has coincided with the exact era in which in our Christian theology we have become obsessed with blood. So I just want to say one simple thing today. Long before the cross, Jesus forgave sins. And it's because of the love of God, not the blood of Christ. Health, community, relationship, forgiveness, all are found in the heart of God. They are part of who God is and how God acts. You and I have been gifted by the grace of God that comes to us, and it is almost entirely based in God's love. It's going to be important to remember as we continue to read through Luke, because we're reading a story on the other side of Calvary on the cross that has somehow gotten wickedly distorted in the back half of the 20th century and now the 21st century. So we're going to have to combat that. To like make room for the conversation we want to have, we're going to have to undo some of the stuff that we've inherited in this culture that we live in. The last thing we want to do is have a transactional relationship with the divine. Community, shalom, restoration, wholeness is connection, and it is all housed in the love of God. I want to show you a little video and let you think about what you've heard, and then we're going to talk about it.